God be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Gospel according to Mark. Jesus left Capernaum and returned to his hometown. His disciples came along. On the Sabbath, he gave a lecture in the meeting place. He stole the show, impressing everyone. We had no idea he was this good, they said. How did he get so wise all of a sudden? Get such an ability? But in the next breath, they were cutting him down. He's just a carpenter, Mary's boy. We've known him since he was a kid. We know his brothers, James and Justus, Jude and Simon, his sisters. Who does he think he is? They tripped over what little they knew about him and fell sprawling, and they never got any further. Jesus told them, a prophet has little honor in his hometown, among his relatives, on the streets where he played as a kid. Jesus wasn't able to do much of anything there. He laid hands on a few sick people and he healed them. That's all. He couldn't get over their stubbornness. He left and made a circuit of other villages teaching the word of the Lord. Praise to you, Jesus Christ. Have a seat. Ah, Paul and that infamous thorn in his flesh. This angel of Satan sent to beat up Paul and keep him from becoming too elated. Any guesses what that might have been? No? Want to take a stab at it?
Blisters.
Blisters? Hemorrhoids? Oh, wow. Sharon?
I had heard he was struggling with sexual orientation.
Ah. Well, that would make sense, wouldn't it? A little projection going on in some of his preaching. Well, the word flesh does lead people to think of carnal sins. Those sins that relate to the physical body, our desires and our appetites. For me, salted chocolate covered caramels might be the thorn in my flesh, those little devils that are sent to humble me in my inability to resist them. This term thorn in the flesh is used only one time in the New Testament, but a few times in the Old Testament. So let's look back and grab that context and see if we can understand maybe what Paul is referring to. In the book of Numbers, for instance, the term thorn in the side is used to describe those nations that persecute Israel. They are heathen nations that oppose God, and God warns Israel what will happen if they're not purged out. In chapter 33 it says, "But if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land, those you allow to remain will become barbs in your eyes and thorns in your sides. They'll give you trouble in the land where you will live." In Judges chapter 23, regarding the nations that lead Israel astray, we read, "Then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord your God has given you." So this thorn in the flesh is not so much a physical temptation, but a person or thing that repeatedly annoys or causes problems. And for Paul, it is in such a way that his ego took a hit. In the church in Corinth at this time, there were certain charismatic leaders who were challenging Paul, and they were influencing the Christians in Corinth in ways that conflicted with Paul's teachings. They insulted and belittled Paul, making it difficult for him to lead the people in Corinth with any sort of authority. We know people like this, don't we? Whether we run into them at church or at work, on the school board, or maybe our homeowners association, their agenda is opposite of ours. They demean us in order to steal our abilities to influence others. The tactics can feel underhanded, maybe even bullying. I remember a time when I ran the mental health program in a medical clinic in Decatur. There was a competing mental health center that thought of a way to double their federal dollars by placing one of their workers in our program, which paid higher, and running the money through the mental health board back into their coffers. When I challenged their plan, it was slightly unethical. The suits in the agency sought to have me fired. They were thorns in my flesh. On the worst of days, I might have, like Paul, called them agents of Satan. But also, like Paul, I grew in the situation, and I learned that my boss had my back. And so in the end, I was thankful that I stayed. Jesus, on the other hand, decided to leave. He realized that unfortunately, even in his hometown, he was judged and misunderstood to the extent that he couldn't even really carry out his mission. Perhaps you know that feeling. Maybe a sibling who thinks you were always the favorite child. Or a childhood friend who believes you need to humble yourself and remember where you came from. For whatever reason, they don't like to see you succeed. Somehow succeeding might make them feel threatened, invalidated, or perhaps less than. John Deere was a Jesuit priest for 32 years when he decided to leave. The Jesuits for him had become family, his home, his identity. An ardent advocate for world peace, he was sent to Baltimore and given no assignment. A not so subtle hint for a priest. A priest who was stripped of his priestly faculties by a bishop in New Mexico because of his prayer vigils for peace and against nuclear arms at the Los Alamos labs, the birthplace of nuclear weapons. John Deere states with a heavy heart that the Society of Jesus in the U.S. has renounced its commitment to the faith that does justice. It has also deepened its financial involvement with the culture of war and decreased its work with the poor in favor of serving in universities and high schools. John didn't feel that he belonged with the Jesuits anymore, and the Jesuits were more than happy to see him go. Given this change and the lack of support and at times censure I have endured over the years and its debilitating effect on my health, John Deere says, I realized I could no longer stay. Pastor Lucas O'Neill writes, sometimes my church feels like a triage wing of a hospital. To my right, I see the pain in a visitor's eyes as he lamented on the stain in the gospel that his previous church had become. To my left, a few members who themselves had left a church over their former pastor's egregious moral failures. They are praying over another couple who only now have come to reckon with those same discoveries. I turn yet again to greet some new faces and discover they're here because they too can no longer attend their previous church. The leaders have become too corrupt. One of them shared a few thoughts, but it was difficult for him to speak. These folks have wrestled with the same question many of us have, and the same question pondered by Paul and by Jesus. Should I stay or should I go? Pastor O'Neill suggests that no matter what you do, you attempt first to make it right with those you had a falling out with. That allows you to put closure on the previous wound before investing in another congregation. But in deciding what is right for you, here are a few questions that might help you discern. Am I able to be in this community and maintain my basic core values? When I am in this community, do I like the person that I am? And does the person I find myself being fit with the person that I want to become? Do I feel affirmed for who I am? Do I find myself able to exercise my gifts and grow in faith? Do I usually walk away happy to have been a part of that community? When we face conflict with one another, it is important to know that conflict in any organization isn't necessarily a bad thing. We have to learn how to have open and honest conversations, but that requires a level of trust and mutual respect. Without the ability to talk honestly about difficult topics, we preserve a sense of an artificial harmony that will stifle the growth of each person and the growth of our organizations. The creator of 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, Patrick Lencioni, says that managing productive conflict requires leaders to create an environment where team members are invested in maintaining the relationship and committed to finding a win-win solution. Kerry Newhoff says in his article, How to Unite a Divided People, 5 Keys to Leading in an Angry Era. Says, just know that you won't win over them all. He continues, I wouldn't have said this a few years ago, but now I'm at the point that given the deep entrenchment some people have in their ideologies, their views, and commitments to spewing hatred, that you won't be able to reconcile with everyone. In the end, as a leader, you have to be prepared to let toxic people go, those angels of Satan that perhaps Paul refers to. Or as members, you might need to decide to step away. A small but militant group is not open to anything or anyone and will resist any views but their own. They'll leave and you should let them go, or choose to step away yourself. Once cancer leaves the body gets healthier. And once you gain distance, it's possible to restore your own health. While we see 2 different responses to similar situations, we know that there's no right or wrong response, but a need for each of us to discern what is right for us. For Paul, he was aware of a chance to be humbled, and through his humility to let God shine. Sometimes we're asked to take the heat from those who see us as obstacles to their agenda or targets of their abuse. And at other times it is wiser to cut our losses and take ourselves out. No matter what we decide, if it's to stay and weather the storm, when we face opposition in the communities where we exist, we can be assured that God goes with us. Jesus rarely backed out of opportunities to heal others, to teach the good news, and to challenge authorities. But there were times that he recognized he needed to go across the lake with friends, or wander off in the desert to pray to his Father. He shows us that need to balance our public ministries with our private spiritual lives, sacrificing in the service of others and caring for our own souls, 2 things equally important to God. Jesus struggled to feel accepted in his own hometown, but he also knew that this world was not his home. Perhaps on those deeply disappointing days when his childhood friends and former neighbors mocked and ridiculed him, he would have prayed these words of author Joyce Rupp. Come be with me, eternal home, as I stretch for the road that will lead me more deeply into your heart. Take me by the hand and be the radiant companion whose presence is enough to give my heart hope and vision. When I feel lost and forlorn, draw me to yourself as I search for the unnamed pieces of my life. Lead me home, lead me home.